Welcome, everyone. My name is Jason Perlman. I am the writer and director of the film Sight, and I am joined today by one of our remarkable actors in the film, this Danni Wang, and also with an esteemed professor of history. Yuma Totani is also joining us today to discuss some of the historical events that we do, in fact, depict in the film. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for carving out the time today to chat about this aspect of the movie. I think what's most important to just sort of lead off with is why there was a decision to look into this period of history within the screenplay and ultimately what we shot in the film. And in the early drafting of the script, which was several years ago, the first impulses of this story and the screenplay, the world was quite different. There was different conflicts at foot. Some of the conflicts that are at foot now hadn't actually transacted like they are still to this day. We know there's some very large publicized and very ferocious wars going on out there. But it was always the intention in the story to speak to a real period of history, because inventing something that was, abstract and fabricated didn't seem right. And there's plenty of human on human atrocities to choose from. Unfortunately, there is a long list. But what we wanted was something that was relatively distant in the past to make the different life cycles make sense, because we're dealing with sort of generational characters that aren't overlapping in the same time frame. So we wanted something that was at least well known enough in terms of a generalized conflict, which in this case, of course, is World War II or the beginnings of World War II. And we wanted something that was also fairly far removed from Western culture, where we knew would be sort of the main character's home in the story. So we wanted to, in terms of the interleaving of souls and distant, connections to other people in another culture, we wanted to make the decision to really take a Westerner who's completely removed intellectually or tactily from these types of events and confront them with another's cultural history, albeit a highly traumatizing one. Because I think when we look sort of reverse engineer the thematic rationale now with the two conflicts that we know so much about day in day out that are happening out there in the world between obviously Israel and Hamas, as well as Ukraine and Russia, there's a tendency, even though these events are so publicized and they're so readily there for information gathering on our news feeds and social media, what have you, they're inescapable stimuli, but yet we still feel, in some regards, depending upon where you are in the world or where you are culturally, you feel removed and somewhat powerless to do anything about these events or to be impactful, or they're not really touching us. So how much do they matter to individuals who are that far removed? And we wanted to turn that whole idea upside down and show just how impactful any world trauma in an interconnected society really is to the human species at large in so many different layers of consequence. So certainly in our movie, that primary consequences is in the spiritual soul realm. But the reason, roundaboutly, going back to the World War II events and the conflict between China and Japan, the invasion of China by Japan, I should rather put it. These were such pivotal and such heinous events that, unfortunately, I don't think much of the Western world is familiar with. Now, we've certainly in media and in storytelling, we've seen over and over again depictions about the Holocaust in Germany and throughout Western Europe, and many other episodes that have been dramatized again and again in films and in novels, etc. But this, at least in the Western world, had really not gotten much press coverage or awareness. So, in light of that, we thought this is a really interesting and important historical episode to examine as far as humans doing atrocious things to other humans, which is also sort of at the thematic core of some of the events in the movie, and also at the same time offering a bit of eye-opening to what we anticipated would be our core audience here in the West of an episode of history that they're largely unaware of. So, and also making that part of the themes in the story, where someone in this part of the world, in our main characters, who really couldn't be more removed from the cultural and historical context that we explore with this aspect of Chinese and Japanese history. They're confronted by it in their own being, in their own soul space, and forced to reconcile with it, to learn about it, and to make it their own. And I think that what the takeaway that I was intending as a filmmaker from that was to put across the idea that we are all connected to these events, no matter how removed we might feel in our own bubble, however many thousands of miles away from where one of these wars or atrocities might be taking place. There is, in the collective humanity of our holistic tenure on this planet, we are all impacted and we are all connected to these events in more ways than we probably actually on the surface realize. And that was what we really wanted to explore at sort of this spiritual level. So, all that said, I think it's much more interesting now to hear from you both, because you have a lot to offer us in terms of historical context and also about personal life spent in that part of the world. So I think I'll offer it over to you first, Danny. If you could tell us a little bit about you, certainly as an actor, and also about your time spent in that part of the world, I think that would be great.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in China. So growing up, I've seen a lot of, or rather heard a lot of what happened
Mhm.
back in the Nanjing Massacre, mostly.
Yeah.
You read books about it. People talk about it in school. There were tons of films that I wasn't allowed to watch at the time, but my grandparents made sure I knew about them. And growing up, my grandparents spoke Japanese because they were being taught Japanese at some
Mhm.
point in their life. Um, yeah, it was very real, you know. So after I moved to America, being
And when
around,
was that? How old were you when when you immigrated from China?
I was 13
13.
years old.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was, quite young, didn't quite understand um, people,
Yeah.
history as well. So growing up here, auditioning as an actor, I don't really get materials like this where I
Mm.
get to explore that part of the history as an Asian American actor. And also, grown up in China, Northeast China, by the way, Shenyang,
Okay.
which is in Manchuria, which is right a couple cities below Harbin.
Which
Um,
is where the events of Sight are
right, right,
situated. Yeah.
right. So when I first read the script, I was I just felt like so much anger coming out of me. I think I read it at night and I couldn't sleep. I just had to finish the whole script. I'm like, but what happened? But what happened? Luckily, my character has a moment at the end of the film where it feels very, redemption moment. So
Yes. Yes. Very much
that
so.
I was like, thank God, because I don't know how I'm going to come out of this just feeling so much heaviness and like, things were out of, these characters' control. Things were
Yeah.
just happening to them. And to imagine myself in this person's shoes, and this is based on historical drama. So, I mean, it's just really hard to imagine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just felt very, very angry at your material, Jason.
I suppose I'm honored. I don't know if that's the right emotional response, but we'll go with that.
Not at your material, at the
Yes.
history itself.
Yes.
Yeah, and which is why, a lot of my elderly grandparents, they were all racist growing up against the Japanese because they held on to that anger.
I think
And
that's still very palpable today from what I understand, that animosity has not seemingly worn away so much with time. Yeah.
right, even though it's happened so long ago, like you can't hold rage against the whole Japanese people,
Of course not.
but yeah, I think it's hurt many, many people in China. Yeah, I don't know a lot of people if people know about it in America, but when I read it, I was like, whoa, I get an opportunity to act, to even audition for this film, felt something very surreal for me.
Hmm. Fantastic. And Yuma, we'd love to introduce a bit about you and about where you teach in Hawaii and your speciality there. If you would fill us in and tell the audience, I think that would be fantastic.
Yes, thank you. So I'm a historian of modern Japan, and I'm a researcher of Allied war crimes trials that are held against the Japanese in the Asia Pacific region between 1945 and 1951.
Hmm.
I teach courses on international justice, war crimes issues, war crimes trials, and the World War II in Asia and the Pacific. My first encounter with Unit 731 goes back to the early 1980s or maybe mid 80s because of a book authored by a nonfiction writer, Morimura Seiichi, titled The Devil's Gluttony. It was a
Hmm.
national bestseller and it was about Unit 731. And it appeared as if pretty much everybody was reading the book in Japan. And
Wow.
my father had a copy, and it was there. So I must have been in elementary school or maybe junior high, but I did read it, and
Hmm.
families of my siblings also read. So, in a different context as in China, though, it was Unit 731 was part of a larger national conversation since at least the 80s, but actually from the 50s, if you trace back this history. In the 50s, there are some Japanese soldiers, former soldiers, who are tried by the People's Republic of China, the trials held by them in Shenyang and Taiwan.
Hmm.
They were repatriated after being tried and convicted and having served their sentences, etc. They came back to Japan and started talking publicly and also writing the confessional testimonies about the crimes they committed. So, and their books were like bestsellers. So from the 50s, actually, it was part of the national conversation. And from the 80s onwards, a lot of research was done about Unit 731. Of course, now 2025, so the younger generation of the Japanese may not know much about it, but if anybody has any, tries to get any knowledge about war crimes committed by the Japanese, one would be bound to come across Unit 731. And similarly, in the United States or the West more broadly, in my field of war crime studies, Unit 731 is actually one of the best researched and best documented episodes of war crimes. To
Interesting.
some extent, as much as the Nanjing massacre, the rape of Nanjing, it's you may be surprised to know that it's one of the best documented, best research in the West, going back to the 80s.
Hmm.
So in and you have a lot written since then and kind of increasing in the last 10 years or so. So when I got approached by you and some students in high school and college lately in the past year or two, them saying to me that we didn't know anything about Unit 731. How come we didn't know this
Yeah.
is totally unacceptable and so on and so forth? I was quite surprised to hear this because in the West, in the academia, this is so well known that
Mm.
that I'm more motivated to have researchers do research on other episodes of war crimes than Unit 731, precisely because it's so well known. So I'm really struck by this gap between the knowledge held by those in academia on the one hand and those in the public. And Jason is right, I think, in pointing out that people just don't know about Unit 731 that German war criminals carried out medical experimentation on human subjects. That's well known.
Mhm.
There was a trial at Nuremberg, um, and yet that something similar was done in the Far East, in Asia. That's far less known. There are many reasons as to why that was the case, but the fact of the matter is that it's just not part of the general knowledge in the West that Unit 731, something like that, existed, developing biological weapons, using human subjects as guinea pigs, and even they use some of the weapons in practice, in operational terms in parts of China.
Yeah.
Those facts are largely kind of unknown. So it's really great that Jason and Danny and other members who participate in this project to publicize this knowledge in a very unique way. It may be a sci-fi thriller, but still there are many different ways in which we can uh, get to know things in the past, things that are really important
Mhm.
for us to know, just for not for the sake of knowing the past, but to act upon our knowledge for the future. So I'm really grateful that this film project was undertaken and was brought to a successful completion and
Thank
is
you.
waiting for release very, very soon. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of the public for this completion of this project.
It's very, very appreciated. I think, and very enlightening because it actually it brings up a number of questions that I have insofar as what I had thought to be true about how information about those events actually made their way into not only common knowledge and awareness in Japan, but the world over. And I really believe, much to your point, Yuma, that awareness is its own form of engagement. Even if you're not actively, working with something as intrinsically as you are with studying war crime, trials and so forth in the academia, the awareness of these events, the awareness in the human canon of this type of behavior to one another, is its own form of engagement that hopefully prevents people from allowing and standing by idly as something ever similar were to occur again. And that is unfortunately probably not entirely the case, since we know there are grievous atrocities going on as we're sitting here. But I think that the awareness is not in any way exploitative. That's not the design here. The awareness that we try to bring, again through a fictionalized film, but also to link into something that did really happen. The motivation for that is to expand awareness and to play into what is the overarching theme of the movie, which is very much about how events that we don't acknowledge, whether in personal traumas and in personal mistakes, if they're not acknowledged and they're not dealt with, they are, as we well know, they're doomed to repeat, as the adage goes. And we explore in the film both that on a very personal, microcosmic level of the individual, and we wanted to sort of bloom that idea all the way to the societal level when, invoking something like these historical events. But getting back to some of what you mentioned, and I think, Danny, you can weigh in here easily as well, based on how your family growing up in China sort of presented these events. Because my understanding, which again is certainly far more limited than yours, Yuma, uh, was that Japan early on, maybe not so much at this stage, but early on was fairly in public denial about some of these events. It was not openly acknowledged and or sort of apologized for some of these circumstances. Now, that's my understanding. Maybe I'm completely off base, but I was under the impression that it was only relatively recently, maybe in this period that you're discussing in the 1980s. I'm forgetting exactly when I came across the time frame that this was done, but it was somewhat recently that Japan, in a more sort of full-throated way, acknowledged that those events really did, fundamentally occur during World War II. Am I wrong in thinking that, or
Oh,
were they fairly
I
open
can
and?
respond to that. That's an excellent point, Jason. In Japan, though, Japan is not one thing, but it's got different phases. The Japanese state has responded the way you have just described. Um, the Japanese society is quite different. It has a very robust civil society since the end of World War II, and it's in the Japanese society that the impulse to acknowledge the crimes committed by the Japanese, come to terms with it, apologize the victims, and so on and so forth, have been going on from like very early on, from the 50s. And that's um, it occurred partly because they are contrite in genuinely, and partly because there are these Japanese soldiers returning from China, having gone through the re-educational program by the PRC government, having gone through trials. They came back and they took very seriously the re-education that they had gone through, and took it upon themselves to educate the Japanese public about their conduct of war, not them personally, but the Japanese members of the Japanese armed forces in general in
Mhm.
China. And their accounts were so powerful. And the Japanese society in the 50s, 60s, going well into the 70s and beyond, were quite progressive and in many ways sympathetic to communist Chinese, as opposed to
Mhm.
Japanese government, which was aligned with the United States government in, taking a anti-communist position.
Right.
Because of this, the public was pressing the government to do something, and that all goes all the way to recent past. In the 90s and 2000s, there are Japanese lawyers associations going into China and Korea and other parts of Asia Pacific, seeking victims of atrocities,
Mm.
Japanese crimes, to including former convict women, those who are forced into sexual slavery, and those who are subjected to biological warfare in central China. And they filed civil suits at the Japanese courts.
Mm.
Um, all of them are unsuccessful in getting compensation or apology, but
Mm.
at least the Japanese judiciary recognized that these were factual, that crimes are committed and they are reprehensible.
Mhm.
Uh, but they stick to the government position that legal responsibility would not arise because of the statute of limitation or bilateral treaties concluded between Japan and the Asian countries and so on. So the bottom line is, here's another interesting case of the gap between knowledge um, uh, of those in the West and elsewhere as to um, what's going on what has gone on in Japan. Um,
Mhm.
So the responses are quite diverse. Um, so that's just a little bit of follow-up to your
Yeah,
answer.
it's fascinating. And Danny, even given the fact that when you were in your youth in China, we were I'm not gonna carbon date the exact years, but obviously fairly recently because you're so young and youthful. So there was already some of this awareness that you was talking about that must have crossed into the Chinese cultural mindset too, because if there had been this degree of contrition from at least the Japanese public by then, even if the state itself at the governmental level was not as forthcoming in acknowledging this, did that seem to have any kind of compassionate impact on your family members, or was the animosity for the events themselves just too too just raw to forgive on any level?
Um, for my family, they
Hmm.
were raw to
Yeah,
forgive. Yeah. I think my grandparents very much, I mean, if I were to date a Japanese man, now they would kill me.
oh my, well,
I know, probably. But yeah, they just held on to that pain, I guess, during that
yeah,
period of time, even though I grew up, not experiencing what they've known. I think it was very much like everyone in the family should know that they should not get close to a Japanese person.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's not, it's, I don't remember if we had learned about it in school. If we did, we probably just like touched upon it.
yeah.
Maybe we were too young for them to teach us that while I was there. But there were films showing the theaters about that period of time.
Mm,
And I remember just being really scared to watch or like even just reading like a paragraph of it. I would just like freeze because
mm,
I'm like, oh, that's something I don't want to know about, but it did happen. Yeah.
yeah. Well, they've done so much interesting theoretical and scientifically tested work nowadays on this idea of generational trauma and the notion, of course, that you can be completely removed generationally from an event like the ones we're talking about, but yet there's something that not just from cultural or family hearsay, but there is a palpable, almost in some cases, they've claimed DNA based residue of the trauma of these events that transfers down generationally, which is a fascinating and in a way sort of dispiriting concept to think that you could be that impacted by something that you yourself did not directly experience, but in sort of a cognitive residue, it gets into your being, and not just from like you were saying, seeing films or hearing family discussions and so forth. I mean, that's obviously an aspect, but they've done these very interesting in-depth studies from different tiers of science. And Yuma, you might well be familiar with this even more so than me, but uh, at the cognitive and psychological level, but also at sort of a molecular, DNA level, that these types of like cortisol stress responses to certain things and aversions to certain things that might be connected to something that happened in one of these events, that it trickles down through the generations. It's in a very manifest way, which is on one hand fascinating in terms of how we sort of inherit the past, but on another level, very concerning that we also can't quite get rid of it. And that's something to be real mindful of as we continue making so many societal and personal mistakes, that it doesn't end with us. It keeps transferring down the line and becomes part of the human encyclopedia of our beingness,
Yeah.
which is really interesting and something that in sort of a more metaphysical way, we tried to sort of take up as a theme in the film in terms of how events and behaviors and mistakes that were made by our key characters were having this response, this impact on others at that very sort of almost intangible level that generational trauma also operates on, it would seem. So there's a lot of interesting reason to reanalyze these types of events because they don't just limit themselves to a little archival slot of history. They have a living, breathing impact, even to now. And one other interesting thing I'd like to pose to you, Yuma, I think that's a little different, and correct me again, always if I'm mistaken, but that's a little different about some of these atrocities in the Asian theater during World War II, as opposed to some of the Western Europe events that occurred, was that there were far fewer, at least in terms of Unit 731, there were far fewer survivors in terms of victims. I don't believe in my research that anybody actually fundamentally escaped Unit 731 that was brought in as a test subject or as a human guinea pig. That when they were at the cusp of surrender at the end of the war, that everything was attempted to be destroyed, including evidence and victims who were still housed there. Even I believe some of the soldiers who were or guards or Japanese part of the Kwantung Army that was running the facility were even eliminated for fear of them being evidentiary down the road. So maybe there's something in terms of the greater awareness out there because of that. Also, because when you think about something like the Holocaust, which is obviously profoundly publicized and common knowledge the world over, except for some ludicrous denialism of it that we don't take seriously, but there were people who escaped both in the release by the Allies from the concentration camps. There were people who escaped during the offing of those events or in the kinder transport to get to the various concentration camps. So part of the voice of the victim was more of an outlet for awareness than I think perhaps it is in some of these circumstances that we're talking about, because there really wasn't, I mean, really wasn't many people who got out of some of those circumstances alive to weigh in on their experiences therein, unless I'm mistaken.
That's my understanding. No victims survived. And
Yeah.
we know about Unit 731 based on the evidence, oral and documentary evidence given by the Japanese after the war. So we do have survivors of bacteriological warfare because, as I mentioned, the Japanese did deploy the weapons they developed in central China between
Right.
1942, as well as against the Russians during a
Mhm.
border conflict that broke out in 1939. Very few of those episodes of biological warfare was successful from an operational standpoint, but there were victims. And
Mhm.
those are the victims that the Japanese lawyers sought after, look for in the 80s, 90s to file lawsuits against the Japanese government. So, but insofar as Unit 731's activities are concerned, we know we know what they did, and we can say we have well documented, well researched knowledge of that because the former members talked about those. And that I might throw this another important piece of information which is that the Allied authorities actively investigated Unit 731 former members thereof,
Mhm.
but not so much to prosecute them, but rather to acquire the knowledge of bacteriological
Yeah.
records, which the Americans and Soviet authorities are kind of racing against one another, each other to
Yeah.
acquire that secretive knowledge. Although it turned out to be, it appears not so useful. So to grant, as far as the Americans are concerned, to grant immunity, the members of the Unit 731, including its chief scientist Ishishiro, may have been really unwise. The Soviet authorities did hold a trial, but at the end of 1948, about 12 individuals, including the former members of Unit 731,
Hmm.
but they didn't really follow up on this. They did hold the trial to put pressure and kind of humiliate the United States authorities in charge of occupying Japan, saying, look, there's this heinous episode of war crimes, and why are you not doing anything about it? How about the responsibility of Emperor Hirohito, who was at the top of the government and the military? He must have known, and so on.
Yeah.
But having done that, the Soviet Union didn't follow up on it. So, but the bottom line is that we know quite a lot about Unit 731 because we not because of victims who are destroyed, but because the Japanese who talked rather openly about it.
Yeah.
And I also want to add, respond to your comment about intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
It's a big topic and a very complicated one, and I don't really know have expert knowledge on it. But I do have students who are like the second generation or second or third generation Cambodian or refugee uh, from of children of refugees from Bosnia, say.
Hmm.
They clearly carry uh, uh, some kind of knowledge uh, of atrocities in their home countries or of their parents' home country. If their knowledge that knowledge manifests itself as trauma, I can't tell, but it really impacts them, and
Yeah.
they oftentimes they want to write about those episodes of genocide for my courses because they need to know and they need to have a conversation with their parents. So your film uh, uh, have, in my view, have two types of audience. One is some other students of mine who have no knowledge of anything. They just grew up in a healthy environment and not much exposed to much knowledge on war crimes in Asia, but the Holocaust. For them, they need to know. And but then you have a second category of audience who carry uh, some knowledge, intergenerational knowledge, if not trauma, on a grave episode of massive human rights violation. And they are the ones who have empathy with those suffering individuals in the past. And I think your film will be able to speak to this second group of audience.
I certainly hope so. And I think that very much echoes what we were discussing early on as well with you, Danny, in a very similar context where, like Yuma just said, that certain students of hers might be, let's say a generation or two generations removed, as at least you were too from the World War II events, but yet the palpable reaction to revisiting this even in an artistic medium like storytelling within a film had such a such a visceral response from you in terms of anger and unresolved feelings towards the participants on both sides in terms of empathy for the imprisoned Chinese and anger towards the Japanese for what they did. Is there something in portraying you as an actor? Is there something in portraying someone that you're imagining going through events like that that you do still feel personally connected to, as you've expressed? Is there a place that you go as an actor to access those feelings? How you dredge from yourself that ability to play into events like this, and to contribute the authenticity that I really believe that you most certainly have emotionally and just palpably, working with you through those scenes. Is there something different when you're accessing sort of a historical portrayal like that you feel very connected to, as opposed to other characterizations that might well be just as difficult emotionally?
Well, what's different about this role is, well, with other roles, I always think, what if? What if this happened to me? What if
Hmm.
I'm in this person's shoes? What are my train of thoughts? What am I gonna do?
Yeah.
How am I feeling? Like, what am I gonna do about it? But with this role, it happened. Um, so the what if became very, very real.
Yeah.
Then it's just like, wow, if I'm in this situation, then God knows what's gonna happen. It's very easy for me to access, that area because it's real. Just
Yeah.
knowing that it's happened and just knowing that so many, I'm gonna get emotional talking about this because I'm already like channeling, my ancestors back then. Um, just the fact that they've been through all of that,
Yeah.
and most of them didn't come out
I don't think any of them
alive.
did.
Yeah, and like the characters that you wrote, they were like actual. Oh my God, there it goes. Sorry, I don't
It's
want
okay.
I don't mean
Please, by all means.
to make this all about me,
It's
but
heavy stuff.
the fact that they were families
Hmm.
who are just farmers, who are just trying to make a living, minding their own business, and they get pulled into situations like this
Yeah.
is very heartbreaking. And it's not just, about the China against the Japanese back then. It's just on a human level, right? Like anywhere in the world, when someone do something horrific to the other,
Yeah,
how could
when
you
one
not feel
culture or one group feels that another is lesser or disposable
right for whatever
or
reason?
yeah.
Yeah. And then it just turns into this whole, that's why our grandparents are racist. That's why, we're being taught growing up that you should feel this way because
Hmm.
us, as in us people who live in this country, should all feel this way because they did that to us. Um, so so yeah, it was very easy, as you can see, to tap into, the people
Yeah.
back then and just, no one wants to be put in that situation,
I
right? So
can't
just
imagine anything worse. No.
yeah, so going on set, I don't think about it until I get on set, until I see this, you know, our actors being these costumes and me being locked up in a jail cell. I mean, everything was very easy once we're on set.
Yeah.
I mean, just yeah, it's been a crazy ride.
Yeah. Well, you do magnificent and truly heart-rending work in the movie, and I'm very, very excited for people to see it, see what you've contributed, because I
Thank you. I
think
hope I did, these people justice
I
by
think you did.
bringing this part of the history to the film.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason, for writing it and shedding light on what happened. I had no idea about Unit 731 growing up
Hmm.
in China. So even though I was so close to home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Remarkable. I mean, the ruin is still, you can see the crematorium towers are still there, uh, still standing. You bring up a really interesting point that Yuma, I think I'd love for you to weigh in on too, is, we talked in the beginning about how bringing awareness to these types of events is in a way an effort to not be curative, but an effort to be because I don't think it can't be curative, so to speak, but I think it's an effort to be a raising of awareness such that we don't repeat these things. We embrace how horrifying the experience and empathically, hopefully, feel how horrifyingly unjust these circumstances were to those victims, and even in some degrees to the young soldiers who are forced to do some of this stuff by their authorities. They're not necessarily by their own wanton maniacal reasons. They're following orders in some cases and probably had no interest in committing some of the things that they were forced to in the fog of war. But raising awareness is valuable, but I wonder, just as you were saying, how your grandparents still harbor this racism and this intolerance of what was done to them, and target an entire culture as the villain in that story. Is there a way in understanding these events, in prosecuting these events, because I know you're a specialist in terms of the trials and the actual legalities of how this was taken to international courts and so forth after World War II. Is there any prescriptive to how we heal? We can't heal these events, but how can we best use information, storytelling, even the legal courts to adjudicate resolution? How can we best treat the past in sort of a healing way? Acknowledgement, understanding is part of it, but and when you teach your students, or when you go through all of the minutia that must be part of these trials and how things were adjudicated and so forth, what is our best hopeful outcome of these types of awarenesses? I mean, as a filmmaker, I wrestle with that thought too. What is awareness? I believe is worthwhile, but I wonder what is our main goal in bringing, um, a fuller awareness of these events to the general populace.
Yes. So um, exactly what you're doing is what we need. Um, Even though we, as I have said earlier, we may have a body of knowledge about Unit 731, that's not enough. We need to continue our conversation intergenerationally so that next generation would be informed of it. We need to keep
Mhm.
our conversation to maintain awareness. Even the Holocaust, you think everybody knows about it, but if you talk to some younger generation people, they may say, actually, I don't know anything about it. We just
Yeah.
need to continue our conversation and provide means and venues through which we have this conversation. So, you, whether you intended or not, your film will be one of those critical tools by which we can continue a conversation. Um, that's one. Two is for us to inform ourselves of the norms being made uh, in the realm of international criminal justice. Um, to the, the deployment of biological weapons and chemical weapons that have been banned since before the start of the 20th century.
Hmm.
Well, with poisonous gas, the deployment of that was banned by the Hague Convention 1899, followed up by the Hague Conventions of 1907 and at the Geneva Protocol of 1925. In addition to the use of chemical weapons, the use of biological weapons was banned.
Hmm.
So
But yet they were used. I mean,
they were
mustard gas,
used,
chlorine
but
gas, Agent Orange, you name it.
so there is always this tremendous gap between the norms and standards being made and the actual conduct of war in conflict. But uh, um, we mankind keeps developing norms in order to not to address what happened in the past, but to address the future. And
Yes.
for us to keep ourselves informed of this process and to use those as a tool to be witness to what's happening, articulate what's happening, and take action. That's really important. So
Yeah.
now we are in the 21st century, and World War II is a long time ago. But since then there are additional norm-making practices were carried out at international, multinational level at the UN. There are other sets of Geneva Conventions were concluded back in 1949, additional protocols in 1977. Then we have the Permanent International Criminal Court at The Hague, whose Rome Statute, drawn up in 1998, expressly named the use of chemical and biological weapons as constituting a war crime. So we just need to keep us informed of what we as a kind of members of the international community are embracing as our standards of justice, and use them as we witness new episodes of war crimes, as well as analyze the past episodes and do something about it.
Yeah.
But that may not be. It's too late for the past episodes for us to do anything, because the perpetrators are dead, the victims are dead. There's no healing for the crimes committed, but still to continue talking about them, to be informed of what has happened, and that keep that knowledge alive. That alone, maybe I'm just being a little, what's the word? I don't know the word, but that alone I think is significant. I'd like to think that way.
I agree with you. I really do. I think that's all we can do, right? I mean, that really is the limit of our individual sphere of influence for most people, unless you're in a major governmental seat. It's interesting, past as prologue, as we were just talking about too, that the events that really catalyzed Japan's invasion of China, and I don't want us to get too touchily political about things happening now, but it does bear mentioning that they are alarmingly similar in tactic as to the justification Russia used to enter Ukraine. In fact, oddly enough, in terms of sort of secular history and entangled coincidence, it's about 90 years almost to the day from forgive me if my pronunciation isn't accurate, but the Mukden incident in Manchuria that catalyzed Japan's full-scale invasion into Manchuria was basically a false flag event where the Japanese army, it's now pretty assured that they created a false aggression that they blamed on the local Chinese around a railway that they controlled. They planted dynamite to suggest that the Chinese in the area were actually trying to detonate the railway and derail some of both their business value for using that railway. And I think there was also some fairly important people in the Japanese leadership that were on the trains at the time. They blamed that on the Chinese, the local Chinese in the Manchuria area, and they used it as a pretext to invade and start an actual armed conflict with them. Very much similar to how the Kremlin has countenanced what allowed them to go into Ukraine. That was actually Ukraine aggression, which we all pretty much know is not true. That justified their incursion into Ukraine. So here we have, in real time, just a few years ago now, something that is very much history repeating itself in a very writ large, almost identical pretext sort of way. And we struggle with this sentiment that I think I alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, where even though we're removed from these events by however many thousands of miles for each of us individually, they are repeating a pattern that now we're aware of, that we've seen play out in other historical contexts that certainly ended with absolutely atrocious and heinous events taking place, which are happening there as well. So we are guided by an understanding of the past and of using past mistakes as hopefully a bulwark against them happening in the future. But here we are sitting in the present day with something very similar unfolding in real time all around us. And I think we each, as citizens of the planet, and in our various abilities to have spheres of influence, I think it's sort of incumbent upon us that do know about the past, and in someone like yourself, Danny, who's experienced firsthand the lingering impacts of events like that through your family and your ancestors, that we don't feel a sense of futility and just closed-mouthed acceptance when these things unfold around us in present day. I think it's incumbent upon us, the more we know, to spread that understanding so that we do at some point reach a sort of a cultural mass where enough people are informed enough to feel violated on other people's behalf, which is how we all really in some way should feel about what's going on in those two conflict-ridden parts of the world right now. So it's a very complicated and it's a very human, long-standing thing to try to get our hearts and minds around. We've been waging war on each other for as long as we've been keeping written records. It's just what humans have done. But be nice to think that at some point we'd chill out on that. That would be the hope.
That that is our hope, but I think it's in our DNA to
Yeah.
have conflict. So
Yeah, it would appear that is certainly the case. Well, listen, I think we've covered some great and very, very interesting and rewarding conversational ground in the last hour. I can't thank you both more than I already have, but I'm going to put on another layer now of all that you've contributed, both of you. Yuma, early on in the finalization of the screenplay, you were very much intrinsically valuable in us making sure we were getting our history correct and we were getting some of these, sensitive topics handled in the right, respectful, historical way. So we're all in the production very, very grateful for what you've contributed. And Danny, you've left everything on the field, as they say, in terms of your performance in the film that you've contributed, and just how truly remarkably heartfelt and heart-wrenching it is to watch you in these scenes. So I'm very eager for the world to see what you've done. And, on a larger scale, hopefully we can use, a film like this to create a broader dialogue out there and for people to be galvanized to know more about these world events if they don't, because as I think we've said again and again over the course of this conversation, that in and of itself is of value, and it cannot help but broaden people's empathy and their hopeful outrage at seeing things at all reminiscent of those events taking place today or happening in the future. So that hopefully is the one little nugget that we can contribute by storytelling in this kind of way.
Great. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you both so much for taking the time today, and we will certainly look forward to talking to you more as the film gets released and we start seeing what types of dialogues do result from people seeing it, which hopefully will be very interesting. That's our hope. Thank you both so much. Really, really appreciate your time.
Great.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you guys. Nice to meet you, Yuma.
See you guys.